I'm Renee Porter, a former corporate compliance auditor and a mother who does not spook easily. Tonight, I did. Videographer Noah Bishop called me out of the blue and said he'd found something in the wedding footage. He told me not to tell my son, Caleb. Noah's voice was steady, but the urgency bled through every word. You need to see this yourself, he said, and I agreed. He sent a clip from the reception with a clean timestamp, 9:47 p.m. It was supposed to be the father-daughter dance. Brooke Dalton, my new daughter-in-law, was not on the dance floor with her father. The camera caught her slipping toward the service entrance, half hidden behind a floral column. She was in a tight embrace with Avery Knox, the man she had introduced as a family friend. In the background, Caleb was scanning the room, searching for his bride. My throat went cold in a single breath. This wasn't a glitch, a shadow, or a misunderstanding. It was a choice. In the middle of their wedding, and that was the moment I knew the celebration had been a hunting ground. Noah's studio sat in a converted warehouse downtown, all glass and cold light. He looked exhausted, eyes ringed with gray, but his hands were steady as he slid a folder across the table. Inside were still frames, each marked with timestamps and location tags. I built a sequence, he said quietly. You need to see the full timeline. The first image showed Brooke at 9:47 p.m., wrapped around Avery near the kitchen doors. At 10:15, she slipped out a side exit while Caleb stood on stage, making his thank you speech. 10 minutes later, Avery followed through the same door, head down, avoiding cameras. By 10:45, Brooke returned, hair slightly undone, holding her bouquet like a prop. I remembered her excuse perfectly. She'd said she felt faint and needed air. Noah zoomed in on another frame, showing Brooke laughing with an elderly guest, her hand resting on his arm. That man, Noah murmured, signed up for her investment seminar a week later. My stomach turned as the pattern took shape in front of me. Brooke hadn't disappeared for romance. She'd been recruiting. I stared at the photographs until my eyes blurred, torn between disbelief and fury. Part of me wanted to storm straight to Caleb and demand answers, to force him to see the truth before Brooke could twist it. But another part knew he'd defend her, blind to everything except his love. Evidence without context would only break his heart, not expose her. Noah watched me wrestle with the choice, saying nothing, just letting the silence stretch. The rational voice in my head whispered that trust was sacred, but my instincts screamed that trust was how predators won. This wasn't just betrayal, it was strategy. If I moved too soon, Brooke would erase every trace before the police could touch her. I closed the folder and felt my pulse settle into resolve. I wouldn't confront Caleb yet, not until I had enough to end this for good. Noah leaned over his laptop, the screen casting a pale light on his face. There's something else you should see, he said, pulling up a business registration portal. The name glared back at me in bold type, Dalton and Knox Senior Solutions. The registered agents were Brooke Dalton and Avery Knox, listed as partners since 3 years ago. My stomach tightened as Noah scrolled through their filings. The company's stated purpose was asset preservation and retirement security consulting. Their client list, pieced together from public testimonials and social posts, read like a catalog of vulnerability, widows, retirees, small investors looking for safety. Brooke had been building credibility long before she married Caleb. And Avery, the man from the photo, wasn't some harmless family friend. Noah clicked another link, showing photos from community events. Brooke and Avery stood side by side at charity galas, presenting themselves as advocates for elder wellness. "This isn't about romance," Noah said quietly. "It's about money and power." I stared at the smiling faces frozen on the screen, realizing my son's wedding wasn't the start of their story. It was the climax of their con. The more I studied Brooke's business filings, the more my own name began to feel like a target. I remembered how persistent she'd been about helping me with my retirement accounts. She said she had access to exclusive municipal bonds that could double my returns in 6 months. Caleb had laughed at my hesitation, telling me Brooke just wanted to make sure I was taken care of. That memory landed like a punch now. He had unknowingly handed her every detail she needed: how much I'd saved, that I'd paid off my house, that I kept my accounts private. Brooke had been circling my finances for months, dressed as a dutiful daughter-in-law. I had roughly $480,000 in liquid assets, and Caleb had recently authorized her to manage his $75,000 rollover. She didn't need my trust anymore. She already had access. I scrolled through old emails, reading her cheerful subject lines. "Let's grow your nest egg, and your money deserves better." They no longer sounded generous. They sounded hungry. Somewhere between love and deceit, my family's future had become collateral. I wasn't just watching a con unfold. I was standing in its crosshairs. By the next morning, my fear had hardened into strategy. I contacted Lieutenant Carla Mendez from the Dallas Police Department, a financial crimes investigator I'd crossed paths with years ago during a compliance audit. When I explained what Noah had uncovered, she listened without interrupting, then asked the one question that mattered: was I willing to act as bait? I said yes before she even finished the sentence. We met in a quiet back booth of a coffee shop near the precinct. Carla outlined the legal parameters. Texas was a one-party consent state, so my recordings would hold in court. Noah offered to set up hidden cameras, and I would arrange a consultation with Brooke under the pretense of investing my retirement. Carla would monitor from an adjoining office with 2 detectives nearby. My job was simple: get Brooke to describe her operation in her own words. That night, I reviewed every line of the plan until I knew it cold. I memorized her buzzwords, her tone, the phrases she used to sound legitimate. For the first time since my husband died, I felt purpose. Sharp and absolute. Brooke wanted my signature. I would give her something far more dangerous: a confession caught on tape. Brooke's office looked nothing like a real financial firm. The furniture was temporary. The carpet still smelled of glue, and the walls were lined with generic posters about retirement freedom. She greeted me with that same polished warmth she'd worn since the wedding, offering coffee and calling me Mom. I forced a smile and handed her a folder of fake financial statements that Priya had prepared. Brooke opened it eagerly, her pen poised. "This is perfect," she said, explaining that her partner Avery handled the offshore accounts while she managed the client-facing side. Her voice softened as she spoke of guaranteed municipal bonds, offering 25% returns in 6 months. I let my skepticism show just enough to sound naive, asking for details. She walked me through the entire process: how funds were pooled, temporarily transferred overseas, and then reinvested for compounded growth. Every word was being recorded. Carla sat in the next room, listening through an earpiece, and Noah's hidden camera captured every movement. Brooke's confidence grew as she talked, mistaking my curiosity for trust. She even bragged that Caleb didn't understand finance and left everything to her. My pulse steadied as I realized I had exactly what we needed: her full, unguarded confession. The trap was already closing, and she didn't even see it. When I reached for my purse, Brooke's tone shifted. The smile vanished, replaced by something sharper, almost disparity. She said my commitment had already been logged and warned there would be penalties if I backed out. Her phone was on the desk. A live call timer running. Avery was listening on speaker the whole time. The air tightened as she blocked the door, insisting that I sign the contract to avoid legal trouble. My heart pounded, but I kept my voice calm, buying seconds until Carla made her move. From the hallway came Noah's voice. Loud enough to carry, he asked for suite 214. Pretending to be a new client. Brooke froze, her mask cracking. Then came the knock. Sharp and final. Lieutenant Mendez entered first. Badge raised, followed by two officers. Brooke's face drained of color as they read her rights. She hissed that Avery would never let this stand. But her words didn't matter anymore. The hunt was over. Hours later, in the interrogation room, Brooke folded fast. She claimed Dalton and Knox was just one branch of a multi-state operation, 6 states. Dozens of shell companies. Millions laundered through fake investment funds. Her voice trembled, but her eyes stayed defiant, as if daring us to believe her. Carla took notes in silence, knowing the scope had just multiplied overnight. Then the conversation took an unexpected turn. Brooke demanded to know if our videographer would be charged too. She said Avery had hired Noah Bishop for multiple events through the same network, implying he'd been on their payroll long before the wedding. The words landed like a crack through glass. I turned to Noah, who sat pale across the table, shaking his head. He swore he'd never known who was really paying him, that he'd taken freelance work from a booking agency that Avery managed under a false name. Still, doubt threaded the room. Carla ordered a background check while Noah slid over a flash drive. His last piece of insurance. Everything I filmed, he said quietly, is on here. Original timestamps. Untouched. It was proof and possibly redemption. Caleb sat in the corner of the conference room, his hands locked together, staring at nothing. When Carla played Brooke's recorded confession, he flinched at her voice like it was a gunshot. Each sentence stripped away another layer of denial until only shock remained. She used me, he said finally, his voice raw. She used all of us. He turned to me, eyes red, searching for blame. Why didn't you tell me sooner, he asked. And I could hear the ache beneath the anger. I wanted to tell him that timing was everything. That if I'd confronted Brooke too early, she would have vanished with our money and her victims' lives. But in that moment, logic meant nothing. He needed someone to hate, and I was the only one left standing. When Carla mentioned restitution and sentencing, Caleb straightened, jaw tight. He said he wanted to speak for the victims, to face Brooke in court. If justice is all that's left, he said quietly, then I'm going to make sure it's loud. A week after Brooke's arrest, Carla called me in with a new plan. Avery Knox had gone silent. No phone activity. No public appearance, but small transfers were still trickling through the accounts Priya monitored. Each movement was cautious, calculated, like a thief checking for tripwires. We needed bait. Something irresistible enough to pull him out of hiding. Priya created a controlled test account under a dummy charity called the Heritage Renewal Fund. We funneled in a visible $12,000 deposit, flagged to look like an incoming investment from one of Brooke's former clients. Within 48 hours, Avery rerouted it through 3 shell accounts, and the metadata placed him at a co-working space in Fort Worth. Carla secured the warrant before dawn. The second phase was mine. I reached out under a new alias, posing as a church treasurer with $250,000 in endowment money, seeking secure, high-yield opportunities. Avery bit. He insisted on a face-to-face meeting to ensure trust and discretion. When he walked into that rented office and saw Carla's badge instead of a checkbook, his smirk collapsed. The man who thought he owned the game finally learned what it felt like to be the target. When Avery's servers were seized, the final layer of their empire cracked open. Behind Dalton and Knox sat a parent company registered under a false trustee, an offshore fund tied to multiple advisors already under federal review. Carla's team traced it across 6 states, uncovering nearly $40 million in stolen retirement savings. The network Brooke bragged about had been real, just larger and more ruthless than we imagined. In court, Brooke agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence, naming Avery and 17 other operatives. Avery tried to claim he was merely a consultant, but the digital trail told a different story. Every fake bond, every falsified return carried his signature metadata. There was no escape left to negotiate. The trial moved quickly once the evidence hit the courtroom. Brooke faced 10 years. Avery doubled that for conspiracy and laundering. Watching them led away, I realized something simple. Justice didn't heal the damage, but it made the silence bearable. Months later, the fallout settled like dust after a storm. Brooke served her sentence in federal custody, barred from ever working in finance again. Avery's empire was dismantled, his assets seized, and every silent partner he'd protected was dragged into the light. Even the peripheral brokers, the ones who thought they were safe, ended up indicted for aiding the scheme. Caleb filed for divorce as soon as the verdict came down. He sold their house and moved closer to the fire station, donating part of what he recovered to a fund for elderly fraud victims. When he testified before Congress about financial exploitation, his voice didn't shake. He said he wanted to turn his mother's fight into a warning others would hear. As for me, I started teaching again this time. At community centers, I help retirees read contracts, spot red flags, and trust their instincts. Some nights, I still replay the footage that started it all. But I no longer feel anger. Just clarity and peace earned the hard way. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it struck a chord or reminded you of your own battles, share your thoughts. Below, your voice matters here. Don't forget to subscribe for more true-to-life stories of justice, strength, and redemption. Until next time, take care of your peace.